Welcome to Crushing Hiring and Retention in 2025. My name is Leslie Spees with Influence HR Consulting. I'm doing a recording of a webinar that I did earlier today. Just thought it would be a better experience than having the breaks for interaction. I'm going to start out just talking about the problem that we're trying to solve today. The Great Resignation is over, but I think most would agree that it's still difficult to hire, retain, and engage top talent. Turnover is expensive. Most sources say 1/2 to 3 times an employee's annual salary. And employee engagement is at an 11-year low. The solution is consider these best practices. I'm not going to solve all of your problems today, but I am going to share some best practices that you could consider implementing in your organization. Here's what we'll cover: hiring for positive outcomes, onboarding for success, and retaining and engaging your talent. We'll start out with the first topic, which is hiring. Clearly, we can't do a poll right now, but I'd like for you to just think about how difficult is it for you to hire the right talent currently. When we did the poll in the live session, it was kind of a consensus that it was somewhat difficult. Maybe not as difficult as it was a couple of years ago, but it's still challenging to find and keep the right talent. Before we hire people, we first have to attract them. So I'm going to share just a few tips on that. Number one, make the process simple. So if you have a 5-page application that they have to complete online that's not user-friendly, or they have to go through 7 steps to your interview process, you're probably going to lose people. And I think, it's about a third during the application process, a third during the interview process. But if you make it simple, you're likely to retain more of those people. You want to create an employer value proposition, and that is simply a case for why people would want to work for your organization, what makes you unique, and why they'd want to work with you as opposed to someone else. And then you want to leverage that information and also have some great job postings and advertisements. You don't want to just post the job description, which is very lengthy generally and boring. You want to think of it as a marketing tool. And yes, cover the main things that you need to communicate, but make it compelling. And then last, you want to have a positive company brand. And in order to do that, you need to have a positive work culture, which we'll talk about later on in the session. Once you have attracted high quality candidates, you're ready to start the hiring process. But most organizations aren't very good at hiring. A recent study showed that 46% of all new hires fail in the first 18 months, and only 19% achieved unequivocal success. So just think about, why aren't more organizations good at hiring? And what do you feel is the most important to a good hiring process? I'm going to go through 5 best practices. This is actually a whole lengthier than an hour workshop to provide information on hiring practices. I'm going to smush it into a short amount of time and just provide you with some high-level tips. I am planning to potentially offer a workshop for managers on recruiting and hiring, and if you have interest in that, please reach out. All right, so here's the 5 best practices that we're going to go through. The first is determine what is really needed for the job. So you want to think through the education, experience, skills, hard and soft, values, and other traits that are needed. I think oftentimes we tend to overstate what is needed. So maybe we advertise that we want a MBA for a particular position, but in reality, based on what the position entails, a bachelor's degree would be just fine. So if you overstate, you're limiting your candidate pool. If you understate what's needed, then you may hire somebody and not be setting them up for success. So you want to really think through what's needed. Did want to just talk briefly about hard skills versus soft skills. Hard skills are specific knowledge or abilities needed to do a job. can include knowing how to use specific tools, platforms, or programs on how to perform certain tasks and processes. Soft skills are qualities and abilities that speak to how a person will do their job and relate to others. And I feel like for many jobs, the soft skills are probably more important than the hard skills. This isn't an all-inclusive list, but here's some of the soft skills that came to mind for me. Then you want to think through the deal makers and the deal breakers. The deal makers are the common assets of people who have succeeded in the job. So, what are their skills, experiences, values, education, and behaviors? The deal breakers are what are the common deficiencies of employees who've not succeeded in the job. So, that could be unhelpful behaviors, conflicting values, or counterproductive actions. You want to make sure that the candidate aligns with your organization's values. If there's a gap with your organization's values, it's likely that it will not work out. So you need to do your best to assess whether they align with the organization's values. And I wanted to share an example. So Patrick Lencioni wrote a book called The Ideal Team Player. And these are the values that he uses to hire in his organization. They are humble, hungry, and smart. And I think these are good guidelines really for anybody. So, humble, what does that mean? That means that you hire people that put others before themselves. They're quick to point out the contributions of others and slow to seek credit for themselves. Hungry means they have a good work ethic. They're self-starters and self-led. You don't have to tell them what they need to do, and they seek out new knowledge. And smart means that they're people smart, and that kind of goes back to the soft skills that we talked about. They have some emotional intelligence. They're able to communicate well and deal with other people, manage conflict, those type of things. All right, tip number 2, train your interviewers. I think this is where we fall short a lot. If you were designing a training program for your interviewers, what would you include? Like for you to just think about that for a minute. Then I'll share with you what I generally include when I do this type training. You want to train them on questions to ask. Asking the right questions is critical to success of the process. And then there's some questions that you shouldn't ask and things that you should not do in an interview. So that should be covered as well. Biases that may come into play and how to work around those. And how to connect with candidates and execute an interview effectively. So that's everything from establishing rapport, opening the interview, listening, probing, mirroring those skills that you can use to get people to open up more, and how to conclude the interview. So all of the nuts and bolts of the interview process. Tip number 3, understand and avoid the emotional element of hiring. One thing that you do to this end is included in the training. I think you all know that we can sometimes select the wrong people for the wrong reasons when our feelings and biases get in the way. In fact, we often make judgments about other people in the first 7 seconds of our interaction, and then we spend the rest of the interaction validating our assumptions. Biases are preconceived judgments about your interviewee, and they could be conscious, but most times they're unconscious, that cloud your evaluation of the candidate and make the interview less objective and, frankly, less effective. Go through a few common types of biases. The first is stereotyping bias. This is when an interviewer assumes a candidate has certain traits because they are a member of a certain group. So we'll say, for example, that the interviewer has internalized a stereotype that people of Asian descent are good at science and math, and they are hiring for an analyst position and think that would be helpful. So they hire the Asian candidate for that reason without really any validation that that's the case. Generalization bias is when an interviewer assumes candidates' mannerisms in the interview are part of their everyday behavior. Halo and horn bias are when an interviewer allows one strong point about the candidate to overshadow everything else. That's the halo bias. If it's something that they didn't like about the candidate that overshadows everything else, that's the horn bias. So we'll say, for example, that a candidate comes in and just in the small talk, the interviewer finds out that the candidate is a Pittsburgh Steelers fan and the interviewer is a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. So they just automatically think, hey, this guy's great. I think I'm going to hire him. Don't pay attention to red flags and other things that happen in the interview process. On the flip side, let's say that the candidate comes in and you become aware that they're a Miami Dolphins fan and you do not like the Miami Dolphins. So the interview goes in a negative direction because of the horn bias. Recency bias is when an interviewer recalls the most recently interviewed candidates more clearly than candidates that were interviewed earlier. So let's say you were interviewing for a position throughout the week. You're likely to remember those candidates that you interviewed on Friday much better, unless you put some safeguards into place. The contrast effect is when a stronger candidate interviews after a relatively weaker candidate. They may appear more qualified than they actually are. So let's say you had a candidate that came in for an interview and they were really terrible, and the next person is just mediocre, but in comparison to the last person, they appear to be great. That's when the contrast effect may come into effect. Affinity bias is when we tend to like people who are similar to us. So just a little quiz. You choose a particular candidate because he or she is way better than the last one that you talked to. That is the contrast effect. A candidate tells you that he loves football, and you do too, so you decide to hire him on the spot. That would be the halo bias. You've interviewed 5 candidates and select the most recent one because you remember her the best. That's recency bias. Use a well thought out, standardized approach. So this is one of the things that's going to help you to manage around those biases. So the first thing you need to do is decide what types of interview you're going to use. Is it going to be one-on-one, panel, group, etc.? You're going to want to plan a process that is the same for all of the candidates for a particular role. And you're going to want to prepare some consistent questions. So one of the things that you should do is scan the application, plan some questions around employment history, education, and any information that you need. I recommend including behavioral interview questions. The idea behind these questions is that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. The questions are developed around how candidates reacted to situations relevant to the job in the past. The easiest thing to do to come up with behavioral interview questions is tell me about a time before whatever it is you're trying to assess. So here's a few examples. Tell me about a time you dealt with an upset customer. Tell me about a time you had challenges with making it to work and how you handled that. Then you may want to consider situational questions. This is where you probe the candidate on how they would respond to a hypothetical scenario in the future. Examples: what would you do if you were assigned to work closely with someone on a project, but you didn't see eye to eye on how to do it? What would you do if you were almost finished with a project and its goals changed? How would you handle an instance of receiving criticism from a superior? Then you're probably going to need to use some probes or follow-up questions to get more information, because sometimes people will be vague or you have some questions and want to know more about a particular answer. And that's things like, tell me more, can you share an example, etc. You want to determine the best types of interviews to use. Decide who to involve. I recommend at least 3 people. And I really like involving peers. Of course, you need to get them trained if they're going to be doing an actual interview, but at a minimum, kind of a meet and greet. maximize the candidate's experience, provide a realistic view of the culture and job. If you paint the culture as like completely rosy and it's not, and the person comes in, then you've wasted a lot of time and energy because they're probably going to leave. And consider things like assessments, shadowing, anything that you can do to increase your knowledge about the candidate and increase the candidate's knowledge about the position in the organization. All right, the fifth area is look out for red flags and don't settle. So I'm sure probably some red flags come to mind for you. Here are some that I came up with. I won't read them all. You can do that on your own. If somebody says, I need a job that's not too jobby, where I can do work that's not so worky, you probably would consider that a red flag and shouldn't hire them. As a guideline, don't settle. So oftentimes we jump to a decision quickly because we want to fill that empty slot. But if you rush and you pick a bad hire, it's going to affect your team and your future workload because it's going to cause a lot of rework. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be frustrating for you and the team if it's a bad hire. As a guideline, if it's not a definite yes, it's a no. If you make a hiring mistake, address it early. Most organizations have that 90-day probationary period. And according to the Culture Solutions, 66% of managers know within 30 days that they've made a hiring mistake. So address it early. Of course, if you can and you have the patience, try to help the person. But if they're not going to make it, then make a decision early on to save a lot of grief for yourself and your team. So we don't have a forum where we can share best practices here. Onboarding for success. So you've hired the right person. You want to make sure they stick around. So you got to onboard them well. Onboarding is a structured way to ensure that new hires get what they need to be productive and stay motivated. It begins after the offer is accepted and up to 3 months or longer. Some statistics to show why it's so important. 27% of employees leave due to poor pre-boarding and onboarding. 90% of a new hire's decision to stay is influenced by onboarding. An employee is 18 times more likely to feel committed to an organization with strong onboarding. You want to avoid this. We've probably all had experiences where we had that with a new job. I want you to think about how you're doing in your organization. So look at these 7 questions, and I want you to answer yes, no, or sorta. So I'm going to pause here for a minute so you can go through each of these with a yes, a no, or a sorta. I think we determined in the live session that most everybody has some opportunities. I'm going to walk through a couple scenarios with you. So the first scenario, we have Sue, who joins WTF Corporation as a recruiter. Sue gets the offer. It's contingent on going for a drug screen and getting a background test. And she doesn't hear back, so she has to follow up. She calls, she gets a start date, doesn't hear anything, specific instructions about her first day, what to expect, where to park, what to wear, any of that kind of thing. So she shows up on her first day at 8 a.m. She guesses where to park and all those things, comes into the lobby and is told just to sit there. It takes about an hour for somebody to come and pick Sue up. Then they pick her up and pretty much just stick her in a room, give her some paperwork, and tell her to watch some safety videos online. Lunchtime rolls around. She doesn't really know what she's supposed to do. She finally decides that she'll go out and get a bite. She can't really find anybody to ask. She doesn't know where the bathroom is and finally figures that out. Anyway, so she goes to lunch, comes back after lunch, sits there a little while, and somebody finally comes in. Her manager takes her to her work area where her workstation is not prepared for her. She doesn't have supplies, she doesn't have a computer ready, and her coworkers don't seem to know who she is or why she's there. So since she doesn't have any supplies or really much to do, her manager says, well, just read the employee handbook and become familiar with our policies. That's pretty much what her first day consisted of. And we've got Parker, who is joining Superhero Apparel as a new recruiter. We're going to talk about a positive onboarding experience. So the process starts before Parker even comes to work. He gets a welcome letter signed by his manager and the team. They shoot him a little video saying, welcome, we're excited that you're going to be here. His manager has all of the supplies, has the computer ready to go, has his workstation set up. He gets some paperwork to do online so that he doesn't have to do so much of that the first day, and he gets clear instructions on what he needs to wear, where he needs to park, what's lunch going to look like, and even kind of an agenda for the first day. So he gets there and he doesn't start at 8 a.m. on a Monday because that's when it's real hectic. They start him on a Tuesday, a little bit later in the morning. He comes in, there is a whiteboard at the entrance saying, welcome, Parker, we're glad to have you on the team. They come and get him. He does a little bit of orientation, gets some swag. Does that kind of thing, gets a tour of the facility, introductions to other team members, as well as others that he may interact with in his role. He goes to lunch with the manager and a few team members. In the afternoon, he is introduced to his buddy and spends a little bit of time with a buddy who's somebody to kind of help him navigate some of the questions he may have and the culture. And it does a little bit of work, sits down with his manager, and manager reviews the plan for his training and onboarding. And he has a really great day. Pretty much covered some of the best practices in the Parker scenario, but let's talk through them. Number one, start before the first day. Maybe a welcome packet or card, paperwork in advance, maybe a culture video to let him know a little bit about more about the organization. Everything's ready for him. Confirming the first day instructions. Number two, make the first day great. So maybe delay the start time, not a Monday morning at 8 a.m. when everything's crazy. Make sure there's somebody to greet the new hire. Make the paperwork process as painless as possible. Give them some swag. Provide a tour. And conduct an orientation, but not too lengthy. There's only so much information that somebody can really absorb at one time. So you may want to split it up into a couple of different segments over time. Provide an org chart or company directory. Help them get socialized. Make sure your new hire is introduced to the rest of the team. Introduce them to others they'll be interacting with. Take them out for lunch, ideally the first day, but at least during the first week. Pair them with a buddy. Now, when assigning them a buddy, you want a positive person, not negative Ned or negative Nellie, but somebody who can help them navigate the culture and that they can ask some questions, because sometimes people hesitate to ask their manager some things because they don't want to look dumb. Consider a mentor. So that might be somebody at either a higher level in their same department or somebody else in the organization that can kind of help to guide them and provide some advice along the way. Have a plan. You want to clarify the schedule and training, Provide an overview of the functional area, including the purpose, organizational structure, and goals. Explain policies and procedures. Yes, they may have gotten a quick overview of those in orientation, but as we know, people need to hear things multiple times, so reinforce those. Clearly articulate the expectations and goals that you have for your new hire and provide support along the way. Number 5, touch base regularly. Managers should touch base with the new hire at least weekly to see how things are going and to provide opportunities for two-way feedback. And I don't mean just going up to them and saying, "How are you?" The person says, "Fine." They're like, "Cool. All right. Great job." I mean, sitting down with them to have a one-on-one to ask some open-ended questions and find out how things are really going. And then as part of that, you might want to consider doing entrance interviews. This is where either the manager or HR sits down with the employee and asks them some open-ended questions like, is the job what you expected when you were hired? Why or not? Why not? What are we doing well? What do you see as opportunities for improvement? What barriers are getting in your way? What suggestions do you have? And you can do what makes sense for your organization. I would recommend doing it twice during the process. So it could be 30, 30 days and 60 days, 30 days and 90 days. I mean, you just do what makes sense for your organization. Third topic, retaining and engaging your talent. Couple of definitions. The first is employee retention. This is essentially an organization's ability to prevent employee turnover. And we know that generally we want to do that, but sometimes there is turnover that is good, and sometimes we need to help employees turnover. So I feel like the ultimate goal is employee engagement. That is a connection that employees have with an organization that makes them want to go above and beyond what is expected of them. Engaged employees help others stay. They help the organization move forward. There are all kinds of great business results as a part of that you can see here. These are from Gallup. Right, so just like for you to think about, what percent of most workforces do you think are engaged? So those are the employees that are really enthusiastic, they're acting like owners, they're helping others, they go above and beyond what's expected. And what percent of most workforces do you think are actively disengaged? What I mean by that is that they are actively working against the organization. They really don't give a crap and they're really pulling other people down with them. There is also, just so you know, a group in the middle that's partially engaged, not engaged. In most organizations, 30% of employees are engaged. They commit rationally and emotionally to their teamwork and manager, drive innovation, probably information too, move the organization forward. They work harder, perform, stay, and help others. Then you have the group in the middle, 53%. They're just kind of average, neither strongly commit or non-commit to their teamwork manager, and they take a wait and see attitude. So if there's a change initiative or something like that, they're going to just kind of sit back and see if they need to jump on board or not. They're not going to lead anything. Then you've got the actively disengaged employees, and that's 17% of most workforces. Cave dwellers, consistently against virtually everything, not committed to their teamwork or manager, unhappy, share that unhappiness with everyone else, and undermine what their engaged coworkers accomplish. They can actually infect up to 7 other people. So you want to take kind of swift action to either move them up or out of your organization. As I said early, employee engagement is at an 11-year low. What do you think is contributing? You can't have interaction, but I'll share my thoughts. So we've had a pandemic. We've had political decisiveness, just this division in the world in general. We've just gotten through an election. we've had inflation. There are just all kinds of things that are contributing and making it difficult to engage employees. Here's some best practices. Again, this is a whole nother class, so I'm just going to go through it real high level. The first is good managers. I feel like this is the closest thing to a silver bullet as it relates to employee engagement. Why managers are key? 70% of an employee's motivation is influenced by their manager. Managers are still the number one reason why employees leave. And there's a recent study that says that managers are as critical to mental health as a partner or spouse. That's crazy, right? 7 critical areas for managers. According to me, I have a book that I wrote about this. So don't really have time to go into this currently, but you'll see some of these pop up as we go through the other tips for employee engagement. And that is because managers have such a big role in kind of being the culture navigator and such an impact on employees. Like for you to think about how good your managers are. If you have opportunities, then you need to consider different ways to develop them because, again, they are so important to employee engagement and to building a positive work culture. All right, second tip for engagement, focus on purpose. Everybody wants to feel like they're making a difference. A clear purpose is going to unite team members around a shared cause and foster a larger emotional investment in their work. So you want to make it your organization's North Star. You want to talk about it a lot, regularly reinforce the organization's why, and then help employees understand how their job makes a difference and fits in with the overall purpose. You may think that some of that is intuitive, but it's really not. So if you're in a medical practice, as an example, and you have somebody that is acting as the receptionist, checking in patients, if you don't have conversations about how that job helps to achieve the organization's purpose, the employee may not realize how important they are to that patient experience. So it really needs to be reinforced regularly, and it is the manager that really probably most often will be having those conversations. So again, the reason why it's so important. Number 3, hear the voice of the employee. Regularly ask for employee input. Let them know that you want their opinions and they matter. When they speak, listen and use their input where you can. Let them design their work as much as possible and try to facilitate everybody speaking up. So let me talk about those last two. So really letting them design their work as much as possible is around providing them with some autonomy. So if they get to the outcome that you want in a different way than you would, that's okay. As long as they are not breaking any laws or breaking any rules, let them design their work to come to a positive outcome. And then try to facilitate everybody speaking up. So there are your employees that will speak up too much, and then there are your employees that won't really speak up at all unless you really help to facilitate that. Some tools for the voice of the employee, stay interviews. Now that is like doing an exit interview while a person is still there. Ideally, it could be done by the manager if there's a trusting relationship, but if not, it could be done by HR or an outside party. I know I have done that with some clients. Exit interviews. So that's getting feedback from people that are leaving the organization. It's too late to save them, but it is good information and things that you could address for the future. Surveys, so employee engagement surveys, focus groups, listening sessions, and one-on-ones are all really good tools for hearing the voice of the employee. The thing is, if you're asking for thoughts and opinions, you need to act on them. If you don't, you're going to be in a worse spot than if you hadn't asked in the first place. Build a culture of caring. To show you care, you want to promote all of the things on this slide. We'll start with empathy. Empathy is putting yourself in the place of another person without judgment or bias and trying to understand his or her situation and point of view. So empathy comes more naturally to some than others, but it is something that can be learned. So I recommend considering working with your managers to increase their empathy and also with the greater employee population. Appreciation is feeling recognized, valued, and appreciated for the effort you put into your job. And it really is a basic human need. William James says the deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated. Why it's important: 81% of employees say they'll work harder if they feel appreciated. 53% will stay longer. It's the number one key driver of engagement, according to the Great Place to Work Institute. I teach a PATS model around employee appreciation. The P is for preferences. Wherever possible, you want to tap into the employee's preferences. You have some employees that may love public recognition and others that would be mortified. You may have an employee that, say, you want to give them a gift certificate for their birthday. You've been out to eat with them multiple times. You should know they're a vegetarian, and you give them a gift certificate to Pigs R Us. That's probably going to do more damage than if you hadn't done anything, right? Shows you really don't know me. You want it to be authentic. So I worked with a senior leader once that would go around saying, great job, fantastic. And he did exude some positive energy. However, nobody really knew what it was about, and it did not feel authentic. You want it to be timely, and you want it to be specific. So sharing the specific behavior that you're recognizing the person for so that they know what to repeat in the future. An activity that I really like to tap into preferences is the book, The Languages of Appreciation at Work. And they're the same as the love languages with just a different twist. And number 5 is an HR no-no, just so you know. A particular method of recognition that I feel like is particularly powerful is the thank you note. It is a little thing with big power. It only takes a little bit of time and the cost of a note. I know that I frequently, as I'm in different offices, I'll see them posted on cubicles, on office walls, and I personally have kept thank you notes over the years as I've switched jobs. I found one the other day that was about 25 years old. Other ways to show you care or to show that your organization cares: encourage team members to develop positive relationships with coworkers. Support company initiatives that are offered around well-being. So, communicate those frequently because people don't remember what's available. So the manager should do that, the organization should do that, and just consider over time what you can offer and what you can do to promote well-being. And be flexible and offer options to assist employees in blending their work and life where possible. Can't always offer remote or hybrid opportunities. It depends on your job function, your organization, and those kind of things. But just being flexible where you can, I think, is important. Number 5, growth and development. Provide opportunities for growth and development. It doesn't have to be anything that's that expensive. Here's some options: training workshops. You can call me. Um, Shameless self-promotion there. Mentoring, stretch assignments, career paths, shadowing, coaching are all examples. Gallup says the number one thing senior leaders should do to increase engagement is to develop your managers to be coaches. So to do this, you want to train your leaders to give feedback, listen well, and coach rather than always fixing or giving advice. So you can see how that's going to help employees to grow and develop in a more informal way. Develop and utilize regular coaching feedback and performance conversations. So you want to intentionally insert some impactful conversations into your culture. And also help employees identify and leverage their strengths. If you're interested in working on cultivating a coaching culture, reach out. I do have a solution around this. Number 6, ensure clarity and communication. Employees need to understand what's going on in the organization, what's expected, the mission and vision, and how they fit in with it. You want to communicate a lot, use different methods, make messages clear, transparent, and consistent. And number 7, promote accountability. When there's a lack of accountability, your top performers are probably going to be the first ones to leave because they don't like it when they see where people are performing mediocre and maybe behaving inappropriately and are not held accountable. They're going to get frustrated and leave, which is not what you want. Most managers are not good at it. In a study by Harvard Business Review, 46% of managers were rated poorly on accountability. And that is poorly, not just mediocre. Stephen Covey says accountability breeds responsibility. If you don't have accountability, you're not likely to get a response, or at least not the one that you want. I teach 5 C's of accountability. Go through these just very quickly. Again, a whole nother class. But the first is clarity. So you got to have clear expectations and communication. If you don't have that, people don't know what they're being held accountable for. Got to have the courage to have difficult conversations. Collaboration is a good thing wherever possible to work with the employee to establish goals, metrics, project ideas, etc. Consistency. So you want to make sure, number 1, that you're communicating consistently with the employee on how things are going, consistent feedback. And then number 2, you want to make sure that you're consistent in having accountability conversations. So if you're having an accountability conversation with one employee about attendance, you've got another employee over here whose attendance is worse, and you haven't addressed that, that's not being consistent. And then you may have to move to the 5th C, which is correction. A few other accountability tips. Don't tolerate bad behavior. What you permit, you promote. So if you're tolerating that behavior, you're essentially promoting it as okay in your organization. Promote team accountability. Accountability does not always have to come from the manager. So there are some things that you need to do to develop psychological safety and provide employees with the tools that they need to do that, but it can be done. And have a no a-hole rule. So you think of maybe the salesperson, even if they're performing very well, they're getting lots of sales, but they are just wreaking havoc on everybody else in the organization. It is not worth it to keep that person around. So you got to have a no a-hole rule, and of course try to help them improve, but if they can't, you need to manage them out. Hold your leaders accountable for holding people accountable. All right. So these are all some great tips, but you really need to find out what you need to do in your organization. And the best way to do that is to do an assessment of all the elements of the employee experience and gather feedback from your employees. That could be either a survey, it could be focus groups, or it could be stay interviews. Once you get all that information, analyze it and create and implement an action plan. So I call my solution where I do that the Culture Catalyst framework. The end result is that you have crushed hiring and retention. So this is just a little quiz that we will not go through, but if you want to take a picture and do it yourself, you can to see what you've retained. And I'd like you to think about what's one thing you will implement based on what you've learned. The next webinar, Leading Yourself and Others Through Change, March 5th, 2025 from 11 to noon. Here's a QR code to get there, or you can go to my website, influencehrconsulting.com, to the events section. Here's my contact information, the website, and I have a best practices handout that has a lot of the information that I've covered today. So I would encourage you to go and download that.